A captured mother in a hostile camp risks everything to keep her baby alive. But when the Comanche Chief discovers her, what happens next is something no one could have imagined. The sun over Texas was a hammer, beating down on the baked earth, and Sarah Miller felt every blow. She huddled in the dirt, a ghost in a stolen land, her blouse in tatters and her face a road map of dust and tears. 3 weeks. It had been 3 weeks since the world ended. 3 weeks since she saw the light go out of her husband Thomas's eyes, a Comanche lance sticking out of his chest. 3 weeks of being cattle, herded across a wilderness that didn't want her, with the only thing she had left in the world clutched to her chest. Her son Jacob, just 6 months old. The camp was alive around her, a buzzing hive of activity she refused to see. Women worked hides, their hands stained. Children screamed and laughed between the teepees, their games a language she would never understand. Sarah kept her eyes on the ground. She'd learned that lesson the hard way. Eye contact was an invitation for things she couldn't bear. Her captors mostly left her alone, tossing her scraps of food, splashes of water. Just enough to keep the machine running, just enough to keep her and Jacob from dying. But they were getting close. Jacob started to whimper. It was a small sound, a tiny spark of misery against her ribs. But it grew, his little face turning red, his cries getting sharper. A knife in her gut. Sarah scanned the camp, her heart starting to pound a frantic rhythm against her bones. He was hungry. Of course, he was hungry. But feeding him out here, in the open, felt like signing her own death warrant. Her hands shook as she fumbled with her torn blouse, trying to shield him, trying to make them both invisible. "Hush now, my sweet boy," she breathed, the words catching in her throat. "We must be quiet. Mama's here." He latched on, and the crying stopped. Instant silence. For just a second, she closed her eyes. She was on her porch, in her rocking chair. Thomas was there, the smell of his pipe smoke on the evening air. She could almost feel his hand on her shoulder. Then a shadow fell over her, and the dream shattered. He was huge, a mountain of a man blocking out the sun. His face was a carving of leather and granite, lined with 50 summers of war and wisdom. His eyes, dark and hard as obsidian, were fixed on her, on the baby at her breast. This was him, Chief Nakoa, the bear. He'd been away when they brought her in. This was the first time she had seen the man who owned her life. Her heart tried to beat its way out of her chest. She curled around Jacob, making herself smaller, a mother animal shielding her young from the predator. This was it. This was the end. "Please," she whispered, the word useless, a foreign sound in this brutal place. "Please don't hurt my baby." Nakoa didn't move. His face was a mask, impossible to read. He just watched. Watched her feed her child, her enemy's child. Then something flickered deep in those dark eyes. Not anger, not cruelty, something else. Recognition. Memory. Without a word, he turned his head and barked an order at a young woman nearby. The girl hurried over, carrying a water skin and a bundle wrapped in hide. And then, the unthinkable happened. The chief gestured for the girl to give them to her. To Sarah. She froze, unable to process it. Nakoa saw her hesitation and spoke, the English broken and rough, like stones grinding together. "Child needs strength. Mother needs strength." Inside the bundle was dried meat, berries, more food than she'd seen in 3 weeks. She looked up at the stone-faced chief, her mind reeling. "Why?" The question was a gasp. His face didn't change, but his voice was heavy, weighted with a sorrow that needed no translation. "I, too, had wife, had son." He pointed a long, scarred finger toward the horizon, toward the white world. "White soldiers come. No mercy." He touched the center of his own chest. "Nakoa knows heart pain of parent." And then he was gone, walking away as if nothing had happened, leaving Sarah sitting in the dust with a gift from the man who had destroyed her world. The young woman stayed for a moment, her eyes soft and curious. "I am Kimmy," she said, Her English, as hesitant as his, was rough. "I help you." That night, for the first time, Sarah didn't dream of death. She slept with a full stomach, Jacob breathing softly beside her, and a tiny, dangerous flicker of hope. But she couldn't shake the question. Why was he really helping her? Was this kindness just another kind of trap? Sarah started to believe it was a trick, a performance. Every day Kimmy would bring her food, show her how to do the camp chores, how to tan the hides until her soft hands were raw and bleeding. And every day Sarah would feel the chief's eyes on her from a distance. He wasn't watching her with pity. It was something else. It was calculating. The kindness felt wrong, like a wolf offering a lamb a warm place to sleep. She started listening, picking up words of their language, piecing together the rhythm of their lives. She learned to smile when they looked at her, to work hard, to make herself useful, to be a good captive. But at night, she watched. She learned. One evening, Kimmy sat with her, helping her mend a tear in Jacob's blanket. "You are lucky," Kimmy said quietly, not looking up from her work. "Chief Nakoa protects you." Sarah's hands stilled. "Protects me? From what?" Kimmy finally looked at her, and her young face was serious. "Others wanted to sell you. To the Mexicans. They pay much for a woman with hair like the sun and a healthy son." The blood in Sarah's veins turned to ice. So that was it. Her worst fear was true. This wasn't protection. This was business. Nakoa wasn't being kind. He was just keeping his investment healthy, fattening her up for the market. The food, the water, Kimmy's friendship, it was all part of the sale. Every kind word was a lie. Every glance was an appraisal. The flicker of hope she'd felt died, replaced by a cold, hard certainty. She would not be sold. Her son would not be sold. She looked at Kimmy, the girl who had shown her such gentleness, and saw the face of a jailer. She looked out across the camp, at the fires and the families, and saw only the walls of her prison. She had been a fool to let her guard down, a fool to believe in a killer's compassion. That night, she didn't sleep at all. She held Jacob tight, his small, warm body a comfort and a terror. He was the reason she was valuable. He was the reason they would sell her. And he was the reason she had to get out, no matter what it cost. She was going to escape. Her plan was simple, desperate. She started hiding scraps of dried meat, a little at a time, tucking them into a small pouch she'd made. She drank as much water as she could, trying to build up her strength. During the day, she worked, but her eyes were always moving, studying the camp, learning the patterns. Who stood watch at night? When they changed shifts? Which horses were the fastest? She acted meek, broken, the perfect captive, all while a fire of rebellion raged inside her. She would wait for the next new moon, when the darkness was deepest. She would take Jacob, steal a horse, and ride east. She would ride until the horse died, and then she would walk. She would die out on the plains before she let them sell her son. The night came. The sky was a black, starless ocean. The camp was asleep. It was time. With Jacob strapped to her back and a cradle board Kimmy had shown her how to make, she crept from her teepee. Her heart was a drum against her ribs. Every snapped twig, every hoot of an owl sounded like an alarm. She made it to the edge of the horse herd, her hands reaching for the rope of a strong-looking mare. She was almost there. Freedom was a breath away. But then she saw him. Chief Nakoa. He was sitting by the dying embers of the central fire, his back to her. He thought he was alone. He wasn't guarding anything. He was just sitting. She froze, hidden in the shadows, ready to run. But he didn't move. He reached into a pouch at his side and pulled something out. In the faint orange glow of the embers, she saw what it was. A tiny beaded moccasin, a child's shoe. He held it in his big, calloused hand like it was the most precious thing in the world. Then he pulled out something else. A woman's bracelet, made of shell and turquoise. He held the two items together, and his massive shoulders began to shake. He made no sound, but Sarah could feel his grief from across the clearing. It was a raw, silent agony that shook the very air. This was no performance. This was real. His story about his wife. his son. It was all true. Everything she thought she knew was wrong. His kindness wasn't a trick to prepare her for sale. He was protecting her. He saw his own lost family in her and Jacob. In that moment, watching the powerful chief weep in silence, Sarah let go of the horse's rope. She couldn't do it. She couldn't run from the only man who had shown her mercy. Slowly, silently, she backed away, melting back into the darkness of her teepee. Her escape was over before it began. She was safe, she realized. But what she didn't know was that he was protecting her from something far worse than Mexican traders. And the very next day, that danger came riding into camp. They arrived like a storm on the horizon, 20 riders, their faces painted for war, their horses adorned with feathers and scalps. They were not Comanche. Their energy was different, sharper, crueler. The camp went quiet, the women gathering their children, the warriors reaching for their weapons. At the center of it all, Nakoa stood tall, his face impassive, as the leader of the group dismounted. He was younger than Nakoa, with a brutal scar that ran from his temple to his jaw, pulling one side of his mouth into a permanent sneer. His eyes swept the camp, dismissing the warriors, ignoring the women, until they landed on Sarah. And they stopped. He didn't look at her like she was property. He looked at her like he knew her. A chill that had nothing to do with fear snaked down her spine. It was a jolt of recognition, but that was impossible. The scarred man, whose name she would later learn was Taba, began to speak with Nakoa. The language was harsh, guttural, but his eyes kept flicking back to Sarah, a possessive, predatory gleam in them that made her skin crawl. Kimmy appeared at her side, her hand gripping Sarah's arm. "Kiowa," she whispered, her voice tight. "Bad men. Very bad." Sarah pulled Jacob closer, trying to hide him, but it was too late. Taba's gaze dropped to the child in her arms, and a slow, cruel smile spread across his scarred face. He said something to Nakoa, gesturing towards Sarah and the baby. Nakoa's reply was short, sharp. A denial. The tension between the two men crackled in the air. Hours passed. The Kiowa did not leave. They made a small camp at the edge of the Comanche settlement, a silent, menacing presence. Kimmy came to Sarah's teepee late that night, her face pale. "They want to trade for you," she explained. "Tabe offers many horses, many guns." Sarah's blood ran cold. This was what she had feared all along. "What did Chief Nakoa say?" Kimmy shook her head. "He refused. He said you are one of the people now, not for trade." But that wasn't the whole story. Tabe hadn't just offered horses and guns. He'd offered something else, something Nakoa's people desperately needed. He offered a cure. For weeks, a sickness had been creeping through the camp, a lung fever that had taken the very young and the very old. Tabe claimed to have a powerful white man's medicine that could stop it. All Nakoa had to do was give him the yellow-haired woman and her son. The next morning, the moral poison Tabe had planted began to spread. The Comanche were divided. A child had coughed through the night, her breath growing shallow. The people were scared. They looked at Nakoa, then they looked at Sarah. She could feel their eyes on her, the weight of their judgment. Was one white woman worth the lives of their children? An elder, a respected woman whose own grandchild was sick, confronted Nakoa in the center of the camp. "You would let our own blood die for this stranger," she demanded, her voice ringing with grief and anger. "She is a curse." Nakoa stood his ground, his face like stone. "Tabe's medicine is poison, like his words," he declared. "We will not trade our honor for a liar's promise." But the doubt was there. Tabe had known it would be. He mounted his horse, his eyes locking with Nakoa's. Then he looked at Sarah one last time. It wasn't a look of anger. It was a look of triumph. He had lost the trade, but he had won something else. He had fractured their unity. As the Kiowa rode away, Sarah knew with chilling certainty that this was not over. He would be back. That night, the sick child's coughing stopped. She died in her mother's arms just before dawn. As the camp began to wail in mourning, The mother looked across the fires, her eyes finding Sarah. And in them, Sarah saw a hatred so pure, so absolute, it burned worse than the Texas sun. She was no longer just a captive. She was a plague. The death of the child broke something in the camp. Nakoa's authority, once absolute, was now questioned in hushed, angry whispers. He knew they couldn't stay. Tabe had turned his own people against him. "We move," he announced, his voice heavy. "Now. We go to the winter grounds." It wasn't a planned migration. It was a retreat. A flight. The camp was thrown into chaos. Teepees were dismantled. Belongings packed with a frantic energy born of fear and grief. The unity Sarah had begun to see was gone, replaced by suspicion and resentment. As Sarah packed her own meager things, the grieving mother suddenly appeared before her, her face contorted with rage. "You!" she screamed, lunging at Sarah, her hands like claws. "Witch! You killed my daughter!" Warriors had to pull the woman away, but her curses followed Sarah, echoing the dark thoughts of many in the tribe. In the midst of the chaos, Sarah did something she hadn't done since the day of the raid. She thought of her husband, Thomas. He had given her a gift once, for their anniversary. A tiny, single-shot Derringer pistol. "Just in case," he'd said. "A woman alone on the frontier needs a secret friend." She had kept it, stitched into the hem of her petticoat. A cold, heavy secret she had carried through her entire ordeal. As she packed, her fingers found the familiar shape of the gun. She slipped it out, concealing it in a small leather pouch at her waist. A secret friend. She had a feeling she was going to need one. They rode out within the hour, a somber procession under a gray sky. They were running. As they cleared the valley, Sarah looked back. On a high ridge overlooking their abandoned camp, a lone rider sat on his horse, watching them go. He was too far away to see clearly, but she knew he was one of Nakoa's warriors. He wasn't riding with them, he was watching them. A chill went through her. The traitor wasn't just in their hearts and minds, he was in their ranks. Tabe hadn't just left, he had left a spy behind to tell him exactly where they were going. The winter camp was a frozen slice of hell. Nestled in a canyon to block the wind, it felt more like a tomb. The cold was a physical thing, a beast with icy teeth that gnawed at them day and night. The mood was as bleak as the landscape. The sickness had come with them, and 2 more elders had died on the journey. Sarah worked tirelessly. She remembered the remedies her own mother, a preacher's wife from Ohio, had taught her. She brewed teas from willow bark for the fever, made poultices for the chest. She sat with the sick, cleaning them, comforting them, trying to repay a debt she didn't owe. Slowly, a few of the women began to soften toward her. They saw she wasn't a curse. She was a mother, like them. She was fighting, like them. One evening, as a bitter wind howled outside her teepee, Nakoa appeared at the entrance. He looked tired, the lines on his face carved deeper by grief and worry. He watched her for a long moment as she spooned a warm broth into the mouth of a sick boy. "You have healing hands," he said, his voice quiet. He sat by her fire, the first time he had ever done so. "The sickness," he said, staring into the flames. "It is why I returned from my hunt early. I was searching for a root that grows only in the high places. A root to fight the poison." Sarah looked up, confused. "Poison?" Nakoa nodded grimly. "Tabe does not find his medicine. He makes it. He trades whiskey to the outlying camps. Bad whiskey, watered down with dirty water. It weakens the people, brings the fever. Then he rides in like a savior, offering his cure in exchange for horses, weapons, or women." The cruelty of it was staggering. He wasn't a traitor. He was a monster, preying on the weak, creating the misery he claimed to solve. Everything clicked into place. The sickness, the offer, the spy on the ridge. It was all a calculated plan. Tabe wasn't coming back for her because she was valuable. He was coming back because Nakoa had defied him. It was about power. And she and Jacob were the pawns in his vicious game. Just as the terrible realization settled in, a warrior burst into the teepee, his breath coming in white clouds. He was one of the scouts. "They come," he gasped, his eyes wide with fear. "A large party. They are not going around. They are coming straight for us." The traitor had delivered his message. The trap was sprung. The attack was nothing like the raid on her homestead. That had been chaos and fury. This was cold, silent, and surgical. The Kiowa warriors flowed into the camp like ghosts in the falling snow, not with war cries, but with knives and clubs. They weren't there to destroy the camp. They were there for one thing, for her. Her teepee was their destination. But Nakoa was ready. He'd known they were coming, and he stood before the entrance, a war axe in one hand, a knife in the other. He was the bear, and this was his cave. 2 Kiowa warriors rushed him. He met them with a roar, the axe swinging in a deadly arc. It was a dance of death in the flickering firelight. But then 3 more burst through the back of the teepee, slashing the hide with their knives. Sarah screamed, scrambling back, shielding Jacob with her body. Nakoa was occupied. He couldn't help her. One of the warriors, his face a grim mask of paint, lunged for her. He ignored her completely, his hands reaching for the crying baby. He grabbed Jacob. Sarah saw red. The world narrowed to that man, those hands on her child. She didn't think. She reacted. Her hand flew to the pouch at her waist, her fingers closing around the cold metal of the derringer. She ripped it free. The warrior froze. He saw the strange object in her hand and hesitated for a fatal second. He had no idea what it was. A roar of sound and fire filled the small teepee. The warrior was thrown backward, a look of utter shock on his face as he collapsed, dropping Jacob. Nakoa, having dispatched his own attackers, whirled around, his eyes wide, staring at the smoking pistol in her hand. There was no time for questions. He grabbed Jacob, shoved him into her arms, and pulled her out of the ruined teepee. "Run!" he yelled. The camp was a nightmare of scattered fights and burning lodges. They ran for the horses Nakoa had kept ready, scrambling onto their backs and plunging into the blizzard-swept darkness. They were alive. They had escaped. But as they reached the relative safety of the trees, Sarah looked back at the burning camp, a terrible thought striking her. Where was Kimmy? They rode all night, the wind a razor, the snow a blinding curtain. Nakoa led them to a hidden cave, a place he had prepared. A few other survivors were already there, huddled around a tiny, smokeless fire, their faces etched with shock and despair. Women, children, a handful of wounded warriors. It was all that was left. Sarah searched their faces, her heart sinking with everyone that wasn't Kimmy. She was gone, lost in the chaos. The weight of it was crushing. Kimmy, her only friend, was gone because of her. Nakoa saw the look on her face. "She was brave," he said, his voice rough with exhaustion. "She led many to safety." It was little comfort. Just as the last of her hope faded, 2 figures stumbled out of the swirling snow. A warrior, supporting a limp form. It was Kimmy. She was alive, but barely. Her arm was broken, and a deep gash ran across her forehead. She collapsed by the fire, shivering. "Tabby," she whispered, her voice a pained rasp. "He was waiting for you to run. He took the others, the children. He took our medicine." She coughed, spitting blood. "He left a message." The warrior who had helped her nodded grimly. Impaled on a spear in the center of the camp. It said, "Bring me the woman, or watch your people die from the cold and the sickness." A wave of nausea washed over Sarah. He had them. He had their children, their hope, their future. And he was using them to get to her. Suddenly, a voice cut through the stunned silence. It was the warrior Sarah had seen on the ridge. 2 Feathers. "We must do it," he said, his voice shaking. "We must give her to him. It is the only way to save our children." Murmurs of agreement rippled through the survivors. They were beaten, broken. Their spirit was gone. They looked at Sarah, their eyes full of accusation. She was the cause of all this. 2 Feathers stepped forward, his gaze pleading with Nakoa. "He will kill them, Chief. We have no choice." Nakoa was silent for a long moment, his face unreadable. Then he looked at 2 Feathers, his eyes like chips of flint. How did Tabe know the way to our winter camp? He asked, his voice dangerously quiet. It is a secret place. Two Feathers faltered. I do not know. A scout must have been captured. His scouts did not find us, Nakoa said, taking a step closer. His war party came directly to us. Someone showed them the way. Sarah's voice was steady, though her heart was hammering. I saw you, she said, looking directly at Two Feathers. When we left the old camp, you were on the ridge, watching us. The warrior's face went pale. He started to stammer a denial, but Sarah pressed on, the pieces clicking together in her mind. Tabby offered a cure for the sickness, she said, her voice ringing with certainty. Your son. He was the first to get sick, wasn't he? The truth hit the small cave with the force of a physical blow. Two Feathers crumpled, his face buried in his hands, his body racked with sobs. He promised me, he choked out. He promised he would give me the medicine for my boy. I only wanted to save my son. The betrayal was complete. It had come from the deepest, most desperate part of a father's love. Nakoa stood over the weeping man, not with rage, but with a profound sadness. He did not raise his axe. He simply pointed to the mouth of the cave, out into the raging blizzard. Go, he commanded. Walk into the storm and never return. Your spirit is lost to the people. Two Feathers stumbled to his feet and walked out into the white wilderness, a ghost banished from his own world. They had their justice. But now they were one warrior less, facing an impossible choice: surrender Sarah, or condemn their children to death. The air in the cave was thick with despair. They were trapped, out of options. He will not stop, Kimmy whispered from her bed of furs. Tabby will hunt you forever. They all knew it was true. Surrendering Sarah would only be a temporary reprieve. A monster like Taba would not be satisfied. Then we do not wait for him to hunt us, Nakoa said, his voice cutting through the gloom. We hunt him. The warriors stared at him. It was madness. They were a handful of wounded men, women, and children. Taba had a war party. We are too few, one of them said. He will slaughter us. You are not as few as you think, Sarah said, stepping into the firelight. She walked over to where the warriors had laid their rifles. She picked one up. The metal was cold and heavy, but it felt right in her hands. One of the warriors laughed, a bitter, broken sound. The white woman thinks she can fight? Nakoa silenced him with a look. Show us. Sarah didn't hesitate. She walked to the mouth of the cave, the wind whipping at her clothes. She raised the rifle to her shoulder, sighting down the barrel at a dead branch on a tree 50 yards away, barely visible through the swirling snow. On the branch was a single, defiant pine cone. She took a breath, let it out slow, just like Thomas had taught her. She squeezed the trigger. The rifle bucked, the sound swallowed by the storm. For a second, nothing happened. Then, the pine cone exploded in a puff of wood and snow. A stunned silence fell over the cave. The warriors stared from the shattered branch to the woman with the smoking rifle. Nakoa walked over to her. He looked at her, not as a captive, not as a woman, but as an equal. He took the rifle from her, then handed it back. You are not a captive, he said, his voice filled with a respect she had never heard before. You are a warrior of the people. He turned to the others, his voice booming with renewed strength. Now, we go get our children back. The plan was suicide, but it was their only hope. They would use the blizzard as their cover, approach the Kiowa camp on foot, and strike when they were least expected. Tabe would be arrogant, confident in his victory, his guard down. They left Jacob and the other children with the older women, hidden deep in the caves. As Sarah kissed her son goodbye, her heart ached with the terrifying possibility that she might never see him again. Be good, my brave boy, she whispered. Mama will return. She mounted a horse behind Kimmy, who, despite her broken arm, insisted on coming. Sarah's rifle was slung across her back. She was no longer Sarah Miller, the farmer's wife from Ohio. She was someone else now. Someone harder. Someone born of fire and loss. They found the Kiowa camp in a sheltered ravine. the blizzard lessening just enough for them to see the fires. Nakoa's plan was brutally simple. He and his warriors would create a diversion at the front of the camp, a loud frontal assault designed to draw every Kiowa fighter. It would be their deaths, but it would buy her the time she needed. Her job was to slip in from the rear, unseen, find the children, and get them out. She was the rescuer. She and Kimmy crept along a high ridge overlooking the camp. They saw the prisoners. The Comanche children were huddled together, guarded by 2 warriors. Sarah's hands tightened on her rifle. She had to make 2 perfect shots. In the dark, in the wind. Nakoa's war cry ripped through the night. The diversion had begun. The Kiowa camp erupted into chaos as warriors scrambled for their weapons, running toward the sound of the attack. The 2 guards by the children turned, distracted. It was her only chance. She took aim at the first guard, breathed out, fired. He dropped without a sound. The second guard spun around, confused. Before he could raise the alarm, Sarah fired again. Another perfect shot. He fell. Kimmy scrambled down the ridge. "Go!" Sarah hissed. "Get them out! I'll cover you!" Kimmy ran to the terrified children, cutting their bonds, herding them toward the darkness. But a Kiowa warrior saw them. He charged, raising a war club. Sarah lined up the shot, but he was moving too fast, weaving between the teepees. She fired, but missed. He was almost on them. Suddenly, from the main battle, a figure broke away. It was Nakoa. He intercepted the warrior, his axe meeting the club with a shower of sparks, but another Kiowa was right behind him. Tabe. He drove a knife into Nakoa's side. The chief cried out, stumbling to one knee. Tabe stood over him, raising his knife for the final, killing blow, the scar on his face twisted into a triumphant leer. Sarah saw it all from the ridge. She had a choice. Stay hidden and protect the escaping children, or abandon her post, expose herself, and try to save the man who had saved her. She didn't even have to think. She scrambled down the rocky slope, running toward the fight, firing the rifle from her hip. It was a suicide run. The shots were wild, but they did their job. They drew attention. Tabe turned from Nakoa, his eyes finding her, filled with rage and disbelief. That moment of distraction was all Nakoa needed. He surged upward, driving his own knife deep into Tabe's chest. The Kiowa leader stared down at the blade, then up at Nakoa, a bloody smile on his lips. "She was leaving you," he gurgled, blood foaming at his mouth. "Your precious wife, she chose me. She was coming with me. Before the soldiers." He collapsed, his final poisonous words hanging in the frozen air. The battle was over. The remaining Kiowa, seeing their leader fall, fled into the night. They had won. The children were safe, but Nakoa stood over Tabe's body, his face a mask of agony, the victory tasting like ash in his mouth. They returned to the cave not as a defeated remnant, but as a victorious war party. The reunion with the children was a tearful, joyous explosion of relief. But a shadow hung over it all. Nakoa was quiet, withdrawn, wounded more deeply by Tabe's last words than by his knife. Sarah watched him, her heart aching for him. Was it possible? Had his wife, the woman he mourned so deeply, betrayed him? As one of the women tended to Nakoa's wound, the old elder, Whitebird, who had been among the captives, came and sat by Sarah. Kimmy, her arm in a sling, came to translate. "Tabe was a liar," Whitebird said, his voice frail but firm. "He lies even in death. He wanted the chief's wife, Singing Reed. He pursued her. But she was a good woman. She loved her husband and her son. She scorned Tabe, and his pride could not bear it. His hatred for Nakoa was born of that shame." The truth washed the poison away. Kimmy told Nakoa what the elder had said. He closed his eyes for a long moment, and when he opened them, the darkness was gone. He looked at Sarah, and for the first time she saw not a chief, not a warrior, but just a man, his eyes full of gratitude. "You fought for the people," he said, his voice clear and strong. "You bled for the people. You are the people now." He held her gaze. You and the boy, Jacob. You have a home here. Always. It was everything she had lost, offered back to her in the most unexpected way. But as the celebration continued, one of the rescued women came to Sarah, her expression troubled. "The scarred one, Tabe," she said hesitantly. "He spoke often. He said he was not capturing you for the Mexicans. He was taking you to a white man. A rich man from the East who was looking for a woman with yellow hair and a baby boy whose husband had been killed in a raid." The woman paused. "He said the man's name was Miller, the same as yours." Sarah's blood went cold. Thomas had a cousin, a greedy, ruthless man who had always been jealous of their homestead, of the land Thomas's family had owned for generations. A man who thought she and Jacob were dead. A man who would now be the sole heir. This wasn't over. It had never been just about Tabby. He was just a hired gun. Someone from her own world was hunting her. The journey north began the next day. A small, battered, but unbroken family, heading toward a new life. As they rode, Jacob, who had been riding with his mother, grew fussy. He reached out his small arms, not to Sarah, but to the big chief riding beside them. Without a word, Nakoa reached over and scooped the boy up, settling him in front of him on his horse. Jacob babbled happily, playing with the fringe on Nakoa's shirt. Seeing them together, the weathered Comanche chief and her fair-haired son, riding as one, Sarah felt a surge of hope so powerful it took her breath away. Her old life was gone, burned to ashes. Her future was an unknown, dangerous path. But she was not a captive anymore. She was a warrior, a mother, one of the people, and she would face whatever was coming for her, not as a victim, but as a survivor. Sarah's story is far from over. A new, more dangerous enemy is now searching for her, and she'll need her new family more than ever. If you enjoyed this story and want to see what happens next, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell so you don't miss a single chapter. Let us know in the comments where you're watching from and what you think Sarah should do when her husband's cousin finally finds her. Thanks for watching.